Okay, and we'll get started. So thank you, Ofo, for making some time for us, especially on a Monday morning. So we're going to talk today for a half hour, and the delivery of this video will be to high school students in and around Western New York, particularly the Buffalo Public Schools, but I think we'll expand beyond that as well. And on the call with us today is Julie. Julie works for Buffalo Public Schools, has been a great partner of 43North's for many, many years now, as we kind of find ways to collaborate to help the next generation of hopefully entrepreneurs in Western New York. So let's start with kind of probably the easiest question you'll get today, which is tell us about yourself. What is your company? And tell us, a little bit personally about you.
Sure. So my name is Ofo Ezeugwu. I'm CEO and founder of Who's Your Landlord? That's WYL.co. The entire goal is to empower and to inform the rental community, and we do that by providing landlord reviews and housing literacy content to residents, and also software around data and predictive analytics to owners and operators. A little bit about myself. I've always wanted to build a business that was community driven and profitable. So this is a great opportunity to do that. My parents are both immigrants from Nigeria and Barbados, and met in Buffalo, New York. So for me, it's been like a homecoming, and I lived there for a few years myself as a kid, and so to be back has been great. And I think the biggest thing for me is as long as I'm doing the work and excited doing it, then I'm really happy.
Awesome. So we're going to spend most of the conversation taking ourselves back to high school for you. So tell
Sure.
us, kind of lay out where you were geographically for high school, your general thoughts on high school, um, you know.
Yeah, high school is an interesting time, right? Because you're thinking of, maybe you're thinking about going to college, and so your mindset's on like, how can you get there? But also you're a teenager who like wants to be attracted to like other people and vice versa. You want to do cool things, you want to go to the movies and stuff like that. My high school experience is a little bit different. So I started school a year early. So all those things like driving a car, going to the movies, all those things I was like a year delayed, but everybody else around me could do those things. So that kind of sucked. But for me, high school was fun in the sense that I took my first ever entrepreneurship and technology class my junior year. It was my first introduction to the idea of technology as a path. And so I had ideas even back then, but I had this reoccurring dream. And I pictured myself in the future. I was wearing this polo, but there was no logo on it. I kept equating that to, okay, well, maybe this means that I'm not going to work for anybody in the future, and I have to create that logo myself. And so, yeah, high school was great in the sense that the classes were hard. I was taking a lot of AP, GT, honors classes. But all that kind of refining and learning was helpful because by the time I got to college, I actually was like kind of over prepared. So college classes didn't seem too difficult. It now is a space for me to network more. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed high school, played sports and all the things. But definitely the I think the rigorous workload prepared me a lot for then what would happen with school and also with entrepreneurship.
So where were you, just so the kids know, where were you living?
Yeah, I was in Ellicott City, Maryland.
Got it. And that's how far from Baltimore?
How far from Buffalo, you said?
No, Baltimore.
It's, oh, Baltimore. Okay. It's about 20 minutes from Baltimore and about 35-40 minutes from DC.
Okay, got it. Cool. So round out what your day looked like. What sports were you playing? Were you in any clubs? What were your favorite
Yeah.
classes?
Yeah. Um, oh, you guys really are taking me back.
Yeah.
I think honestly that was my favorite class, my entrepreneurship and technology class. I love the teacher. I love what we talked about. I love that there was structure and a lack of structure at the same time because entrepreneurship, that is exactly what it is, right? Like you're creating a structure as you forge forward. Um, so for me, I played basketball. Prior to playing basketball in high school, I played travel ball for a long time. Did taekwondo for a long time. Was black belt taekwondo. I was am. Um, and in high school, I think my senior year, I did track and field just to kind of give it a shot. Was definitely favored basketball more, but for me, high school was a great experience. I mean, my day to day, I think I was probably up earlier for high school than I was for college for most days because the bus would pick us up at like 6:25, so it'd still be dark outside, and then we'd be in class. Classes started I think at like 7:25. And we'd be in class till about 2:15, 2:30 p.m. And then you do sports and whatnot after that if you were in any kind of clubs or sports. And then, from like 6 p.m. on was your time, family time, homework time, study time, all the above, right? Um, so that was like my high school kind of breakdown. Weekends, always something like going on, whether it was family related, family friends, friends from school. So it was super involved in that way too. And yeah, that was it.
So I get a sense you generally liked your high school years.
Generally, yeah. I mean, there was the thing about high school is like it's always going to be good and or bad, right, or both, right? So for me, I enjoyed it. I think the sports guy in me feels like I could have been utilized better in basketball. but but aside from that, I did enjoy it. And my experience was pretty interesting and unique. Like so just to kind of walk it back a little bit, I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, um, then moved to Clifton, New Jersey, and it was only over a few years span. But that was like we were in a studio apartment in kind of a dangerous neighborhood, but we were moving with my parents' careers. So from there, that's how I got to Buffalo. They moved back to Buffalo where they met, and took the kids with them. And so that was my Buffalo experience. Lived in Buffalo for a few years, then moved to Baltimore, then moved to Ellicott City. So I kind of bounced around the Northeast a bit. And in that experience, though, I went from mostly the students I was in class with being Black and brown to like mostly students I was in class with being white. And I was then the only Black and brown kid, or often the only Black or brown man. So in these classes, I'm still, this is talking about my grade school experience being the early 2000s and stuff. Like I was still wearing baggy South Pole and Averex, jerseys and stuff. And that's not what everyone else in class was wearing, but for me, I learned very, very early on that it's about what's up here. And I was respected even more, I think, for being fully myself and authentic in these spaces. Even if I didn't realize what I was doing at the time as a kid, I just was like, no, I like dressing this way, I like being this way, I like talking this way. But I didn't realize that was like, I guess, revolutionary unto itself, right? Because most kids were looking to fit in so that we're not standing out. But with a name like Ofo, I stood out from the beginning. Had to just dive all the way in.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you weren't wearing the polo on the polo shirt, right?
Right. Exactly.
So tell us, looking back, is there anything and maybe it's what you just said, but anything you would do differently or reconsider and take a different approach?
Um, I think it's maybe easier now because I think technology was part of my life too growing up, but easier now in the sense that entrepreneurship has become a buzzword. At the time, I think I guess you can acknowledge that it was becoming that because I had a technology entrepreneurship class, but I still, I wasn't really thinking about what that actually meant in full. Now, we've seen enough stories of like young people raising a lot of money, building businesses, selling businesses. Like the narrative is more so out there. And so if I can't change time, but if there was something that could be interesting or could be different to go back and do is if I had known more about how you go about building a company. I would have been like diving deeper in those books. Like I had a conversation the other day, and I've said this several times, but like oftentimes I feel like in our society we wait till people are like older to prove that they can manage or lead others. And the reality is that's a skill set. So if you teach a 17-year-old how to manage and lead others, they could actually get pretty good at it. And so by the time they're 25, they're 30, they're 40, they're really good at it. But I think that part's missed so often. We teach people to be led versus teaching people to lead. And so that's one thing I would change about my experience.
Very interesting. Julie,
Love
anything
it.
else before we go to college?
Well, yeah, I know we're about to transition to college, but is college something like as a young person in high school, was a goal of yours always to go to college? And if so, like where did that come from? Or did you change your mind during high school or anything like that?
So I almost changed my mind while I was in college. So we could definitely touch on that. But I two immigrants in a household, you're going to college. Like that's the push, right? Like we've all heard the jokes before. You have an option of what you want to do in life, whether it's accountant, lawyer, doctor. That's similar things. But I think my parents were always had the energy of like, do what you love and just put your all into it. And my mom's big thing was, I always remember this, like, but she was always like, if you like, so if you go into a test and you get a B, right? But you didn't study as hard as you could have, you have to live with that, realizing you could have gotten that A. But if you go into a test and you get a B, and you know you put everything behind getting that B, then you can rest proudly. And I was like, that's always stuck with me, you know. And so the idea is always to give it to your best shot and live with the rest.
So for some of the students that are going to be watching this, they're going to be literally, having applied to school or to college or on their way to do that. So talk about that for you, the transition, how you decided where to go to school, that type of stuff.
Sure. For me, I think when I think back to it, I think my insecurity of maybe getting a no is why I didn't apply to any Ivies. But I didn't quantify. I didn't think about that at the time. I was like, nah, that wouldn't make sense. I don't think I have the grades for that. But I got into all the schools I applied to. I was choosing between Temple University and University of Maryland. I didn't want to stay in Maryland, but when I went to the college visit, it was great. Like I had a really great experience. But then when I went to Temple as well, and that was a recommendation from my mom's friend at work. She was like, her son that went to Temple, she figured I might like it because we had similar personalities. I never met her son, interestingly enough. But when I went, I saw what she meant. Like I loved the school immediately. So applied to all my schools. Those two, it came down to choosing between those two. Temple ended up edging Maryland out by a decent shot, just because at the time Temple was pushing entrepreneurship heavily. It was touting its entrepreneurship program, which was top 5 in the nation at the time. They had a very strong management and information systems program online as well as in person. They had opened up this brand new fancy tech center on campus with like 800 plus computers, Macs, and all the things. Never used the Mac at the time, but it was cool that they had them. So I ended up going to Temple because of that, and it was super diverse. And I love that as well, because you just felt the vibrancy of the students around the campus. So that's how I ended up choosing Temple, and honestly, one of the best decisions I've made for myself in my life, because still have a lot of great connections there, still do a lot of work with the school, still support them a lot. They still support us a lot. Our first ever check into the business came from Temple University. So a lot of cool things came about from really following that path.
Cool. So Temple's in Philadelphia, correct?
Yeah, yes, in Philly.
Cool. Tell us about your kind of day there. Obviously, you weren't getting up at 6:20 or getting on the bus at 6:20 like in high school. So maybe in some ways it was a little easier. But talk us through your curriculum and kind of when you weren't in the classroom, what were you up to?
Yeah. So I'll start first with when I wasn't in the classroom. When I wasn't in the classroom, I was very involved. Early on, I joined the Entrepreneurial Student Association. And by the time I left the school, I was the VP of that organization. I also was the VP of the student body at Temple University. And that's how I even thought of the idea initially for Who's Your Landlord. What else? I had a lot of friends and stuff. Like I was always, in the mix and see what was happening, going to different events and stuff. And that kept me really plugged in. So I had I played sports too, but not for the team. I played like more intramural sports, so still basketball, still handball, those kind of things as well. I had an exciting undergrad experience. Class schedules varied. You had your Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, and you had your Tuesday and Thursday classes. If you had them Tuesdays and Thursdays, they were an hour and 20 each. If you had a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it was 50 minutes per class. And the way it worked was, you had your kind of entry level courses, your general education courses that everyone took freshman and sophomore year. And you were starting to get your toes wet in whatever major you had selected and or minor. And then by junior year, senior year, you're off to the races. You're in your capstone courses. You're in those weed out courses, which can be tough. I enjoyed my college experience. The day to day, that's the craziest part, but really honestly, early on, I had all other jobs as well. Like I got into acting and modeling when I was in college as well. I spent my summers I was a licensed health life in health life. I'm forgetting it now, but insurance producer. I did a couple summers at Johns Hopkins working with their School of Education and helping them bridge the gap with innovation and entrepreneurship as well. And then when I was doing acting and modeling stuff, I would literally hop in my car, like drive to New York City in the middle of the day between class courses, would pay like $30 to park for like 5 minutes, do the audition, hop back in the car, drive right back to Philly and go to class. So you can figure out a way to get after it, but it's college is cool because you can figure out the things you're interested in. You can get a lot of informational interviews going because you can use that .edu email address and people want to help. So I was always learning and always just doing things.
Yeah, I get a sense. So, there's a lot of nerves, right, associated with going to college. You're moving out of your parents' house. You kind of might be living on your own for the first time. You're living with complete strangers. Um, and I would agree in that the busier you are, the more folks you get to know or clubs you show up for meetings to. You just never know where you're going to kind of find something that you're passionate about or a person that's really going to be able to help you or a new friend. So talk through the importance of showing up to things that maybe you don't know anything about or might have an interest in, and just kind of putting yourself out there, the importance of that as someone new to the college scene.
So I think we have a tendency, like if you think back to when classes started, students have a tendency to be like, oh, well, if I miss the first class or two, it's not that big a deal. It's usually just, the beginning of the course.
Syllabus.
And we have that mentality, right? And yeah, right, syllabus week. And so we have that mentality, but the reality is like a few of my like best friends to this day are all kids I met during orientation at Temple. And so that means before we were ever on campus for classes, this was like that 4-day period. You got to meet other out-of-state kids. And remember, at that point in time, you all have more in common than not because nobody knows anybody there. Like, so as a result, you're starting from ground zero together. And I think that has to be why we're all still really close friends to this day, because you have very similar experiences, right? So I would say don't blow off those seemingly like innocuous things, those seemingly like, okay, like those cheery things, like they're actually very important because you learn a lot about yourself. When I was dropped off on campus, I didn't know a single soul at Temple. And I kind of wanted that. I wanted a new start. That's why I didn't really want to go to Maryland. I figured it'd be like reliving high school, which wouldn't have been bad, but also I wanted to learn more about myself. And the best way to do that was to be in a new environment. So I'd say make sure to tackle all those early things, be involved. Sometimes it's not even about necessarily putting yourself out there more than it's just being there so that someone else might spot you, but you have to be there like first and foremost.
For sure. I couldn't agree more. And I too, like the dreaded, icebreaker games or like the random social events during the orientation week that you don't want to go to. But to your point, everyone there is in the same boat, especially in big schools where there's thousands, and I agree. Some of my best friends are people I met that like people that would be in my wedding are people I met in orientation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so impactful.
100%.
It's so tell us though about, for you, I know entrepreneurship and kind of the vision for Who's Your Landlord came as a result of your involvement on campus. So talk us through that and where you found the idea for Who's Your Landlord.
Yeah. So because I was learning entrepreneurship, I was already kind of entrepreneurially inclined. I had at the time I was running a business called Untapped, which was a brand development and communication firm. So we work with putting your message in front of the right people, whether it was businesses or artists. And I came up with the idea for that while I was working a summer as an insurance producer because I was absolutely miserable, pulling my hair out. It wasn't for me. And I was realizing, okay, that like this route is the route I'd like to live, which is the entrepreneurial one. That said, it was very difficult. Relying on college students to like pull their weight it's like another group project. So you're kind of left pulling all the weight yourself. But it was a good experience. Who's Your Landlord came about because in the process of running for office, to be the VP of the student body at Temple, one of the things, so North Philadelphia is an area that was changing rapidly because of Temple's presence. So not only did you have community members being displaced, but more importantly to me at the time were the students I was living with every single day. They were having really bad issues. We were seeing things like male landlords harassing female tenants, pest issues, infestation when it came to pests, electrical fires. We had a student, them and their roommates, their home burned down over the winter break. They came back, it was electrical fire. and the landlord was still asking for rent for January. So we were just seeing all kinds of crazy things. And I was like, look, there's gotta be a way we can review landlords that at least you know what to expect before signing that lease. And the students really resonated with it. We ran with it on our campaign or platform. And at the time it was like a rate your landlord site. So it was very in the early stages. I knew I wanted to eventually build it into something, to a business. I just didn't know how to do it at the time. And so, you know, but at least it got our feet wet, and it allowed us to eventually end up applying to Temple for their Be Your Own Boss Bowl, which is where that first $20,500 check came from. And so that was a grant to just get started. So I love that path because it was fun. It was cool going around campus, interviewing students, asking them about their issues, and then like creating content around it, creating a platform around it. And then a few years later, thinking through how to make it actual like business, which was cool too.
I love that. So talk to me even more generically. How do you find an idea for a business?
You gotta find the problem first. So yeah, whenever you're thinking about starting a business, uh, um, it should start from something that you found to be very annoying to yourself. Because you can count on it. If you find something annoying, there's at least 1,000 people, maybe a million people that have found that annoying too. You know, I think as you get bigger, you can become like Apple, where they can create their own problems. It's like you should have an iPad. Now we all have iPads and stuff, right? But in the beginning, you have to find what people need and what you yourself needs. You know, people are always surprised to learn that I actually had a good landlord experience at Temple. But that helped because I knew what a good landlord experience looked like. You know, so when people were telling me their stories, I was like, oh, this is awful. Like you need a site. um, and so I think start first with that. And then once you figure out how to solve the problem for yourself, try to replicate it. Right. And in the beginning, ask people if they experience the same issues you have. But that's how you first figure out identify the problem, and then you can figure out a solution to that problem.
So easy, or it sounds so easy.
Sounds easy, but yeah, you're right. It can be difficult, right? Because you can have a problem, hop on Google and realize 1,000 companies solve that problem. You just didn't know they existed. So that's why that research part is so important. You got to figure it out like in a very granular like way. You know.
Couldn't agree more.
Then as you've grown your business, have you found like you've needed a network of people now to like support you and help you in areas that maybe you didn't know as much about?
Yeah.
Like now you have a business, but maybe there's some things that are like, oh, I'm not like the legal ends or the communication or marketing or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'd encourage is as much as some of the basic things around business are in the legal space and then the accounting space. And so, you know, especially as a college student, especially as a high school student, you can get access to, you know, even if it's like a paralegal or someone that's studying law in school, you want to have conversations with them early just to understand what goes into making the framework of a business. And if privileged in the space where you are, then you want to ask your parents, hey, who do you use for counsel? Who do you use for accounting? Because in the beginning of your business, you don't have to have the business top industry expert. You just need someone who like knows the framework. So I would say exhaust those resources. Ask your professors, ask your teachers if they have recommendations for people who will give you, 30 minutes of their time or will work pro bono as an early stage startup or whatever the case is. But also it's your job to know what you don't know. In the beginning, we don't really know all what that is, but I remember being asked a question one time by a young student who was like, how do you like start a business? It's like, I know that sounds weird, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you like start, like I get it, but how do you start it? And I was like, I know exactly what you're asking. And a lot of it's from, you don't really know what to do. And so when you find out how to, create a C Corp or create a LLC, you can do that online nowadays. And those are some good, interesting steps. I still err on the side of figure out if the problem is even worth addressing. Like, do you have a real problem solution thing here? And then once you get out there and try it more, then you can go out and then, get everything all buttoned up with an LLC and stuff like that. But you just don't want to go down that path, spend a lot of money, spend a lot of time, and then all to find out no one cares about the problem you're looking to solve, right? So I'd say as much as you can create that framework, and realize, the students, your fellow peers on campus, they're there to support you as well. While you may be studying marketing as a major, someone studying literature, someone studying, communication, someone studying accounting, and so on and so forth. One of the earliest things I did at WIL was, this is before we were a company at the time even, but I just tapped a lot of the smartest people I knew at Temple that were in all the different areas that would apply to a business. And I had access to those people because of the organizations I had joined. So that's why it's like this, it's the ecosystem. And people are always down to try new things, and you figure out what has sticking power and what doesn't, and you go from there.
I love it. Ofo, talk to us about failure for you. So maybe you have specific instances of it top of mind. How did you handle it? How do you move on?
Yeah, like as an entrepreneur, you're gonna fail a lot. Like that's just part of it. There's that saying, like, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. You're always uncomfortable. I was in a meeting this morning, and it was like a founders conversation, and one of the founders had said, going into next year, I have 50% certainty, which is the best we've ever had. And I was like, that's such an interesting way to look at it. Because I'm like, every year you're planning for it, but you don't. I mean, look at COVID, changed this entire year, right? So like, you can only plan but so much, and the rest just starts happening at you, and you're dealing with it in real time. So failure, like, it's part of it. I think that the biggest thing to do is to own those failures, right? Like, I love, there's all kinds of quirky events for this kind of stuff where it's like people will get up and share the failures of the year, and then people will laugh, and then the next person will get up and share their failures, and everybody like, ooh, we've all failed. But as an organization, you have to create the environment where it's okay to try things. And the reality is, when you try things, half the time you're going to fail, sometimes more. I think the stats are all grim in terms of how many companies make it to year 5. The stats are all grim in terms of how many companies last past year 2. That's the nature of it. The stats are very grim when you look at like VCs and their expected earnings. At 10 companies, one's going to be that Facebook or that Instagram, right? So like, those are the odds we're playing with. If it's baseball and you hit the ball, 3 out of 10 times, you have a pretty good, hit percentage, right? So like, realize your job is to you're going to lose more than you win, but those wins should cover the losses. Like, that's the goal. And so that gets to the energy of failing forward. Pick yourself up, be honest with yourself, be honest with your team, identify why you failed, and then try it again the next time in a better way. And so that's what I'd highlight. But failure, we fail every single day. Like, that's just the reality of it. But the wins outweigh the failures.
Amazing. Julie, anything from your side?
Well, I was just, I know you knew that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, so you were able to, like, fortunate enough to study that and the principles and things like that. But what if maybe I don't know yet? What are some like skills that you can develop that have helped you the most as an entrepreneur that you might not have read out of a book?
Sure. So first thing I'll say is that the interesting thing about the time I was learning entrepreneurship is it operated more as like inception. Like, it creates that spark. Okay, you can create something that wasn't there. But honestly, the course, and I've even given Temple this feedback, the course load and the work, what I was realizing was it was a business major with the tag entrepreneurship on top of it. And the differentiator actually was the ESA, the Entrepreneurial Student Association, which you got to be a part of, which is a more inception, more people talking about ideas. So what I'd say is, don't be discouraged if you studied anything outside of entrepreneurship, because you're probably actually more suited for it than I was, in that when you study so generally, it's very hard to lock in on what your thing is. Whereas if you're in art school, if you're in any other sector, you can really hone in on a specific skill, or a specific industry or specific task, and then create a business around it. So I would say use the energy of entrepreneurship as more of a concept and an idea to spark you thinking of things expansively and differently. And then, surround yourself with people that are trying to do it as well. And I love the idea of thinking of it. Entrepreneurship is not just tech entrepreneurship, right? Like, nowadays, everybody's going to touch technology, of course. Like, that's just the reality of it. But like a local bodega or a corner store, right? Like, that's an entrepreneur as well, the owner of those shops, a salon. There's so many things in our neighborhoods these are entrepreneurs that have made a living doing this, have hired people, have pay taxes, right? Like, so interviewing them, talking to them, getting to understand their roles, like my realist lessons have only come from being out there, talking to entrepreneurs that are doing it yourself, being an intern or apprentice to some of those entrepreneurs. This is just one of those industries you cannot learn in a classroom. You can get the frameworks, but even so, there was no, lean business model canvas. We weren't going over that at the time. We weren't going over, I didn't even know what an operating agreement was till after college, right? So like, these are all the basic things, but I learned them after school. And that's okay. Like, YouTube can be your best friend, and you can dive deep there and learn a lot of things.
And did you learn the most from technology and things like that, or did you have like a specific mentor or person that's kind of stuck with you through this process?
A specific mentor. For me, and this is why, that's why there's that gap in terms of when I came up with the idea, when we actually, became a C Corp. I didn't know enough. I was trying to figure out how to grow it, but I talked about Who's Your Landlord at this event and how it could grow and how it could be big in New York City and San Francisco and all these places. And one of the gentlemen that was on the panel with me, his name is Eric Joshua, way more accomplished, had raised $31 million for his startup. Like, and he'd heard the idea. He had a horrible experience with his wife in the Bronx, New York, and was like, hey, I think you're onto something, kind of keep it up. Let's connect. And then like, I reached out to him because I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a New York entrepreneur. So I like reached out to him, and he, of course, no response. So months had passed, and I was at Fordham for this other event, and I kept talking about this idea I had, and I wanted to make it a business. And he happened to be at that event. And so he heard it again. He was like, oh, he's like, I know you reached out to me. I've been so busy. Let's actually get coffee this time. And so I was jazzed. We got coffee, and it's interesting. Like, I didn't know much about finances or any of that stuff around business. But every week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would commute to his spot in the Bronx. He had this big screen TV. I'd pull up our Excel spreadsheet, and he would just crucify me on the numbers, like over and it was horrible. Like the winter, it was a cold winter. The responses were even colder, and so, but I learned a lot. And that's how actually we end up winning the Be Your Own Boss Bowl, because I knew more than most people. So what happens is, I applied for that 3 different times under 2 different companies. First was Untapped, and then it became Who's Your Landlord by the end. But the first year in applying for it, I worked with a few team members for Untapped, and it was like, took us like 3.5, 4 months to create the business plan. The second year, I sat at a computer myself and did it in 4 days. The third year, where we actually won, I sat at a computer myself, locked myself in the office, and busted it out in 9.5 hours. And that was a business plan top to bottom. But I knew everything now because I had the mentor who had done it before. And the cool thing about Eric, and he talks about this openly, he raised $31 million and his company failed. And that level of honesty with me in the beginning, I knew he was different, because I was like, that's an ego bruise to the core, right? And even more, he was even more honest. He said, look, I was able to, as a CEO, raise $2 million. The investors I brought in kind of were trying to push me out because they felt like they had a guy that was vetted, that could really build the company. They brought in a new CEO. He moved to CMO. And then that new CEO, with his help, raised then the remaining $28+ million. But he said, but it was never the same because it wasn't him at the helm running the business. And so his feedback and advice to me was to never let that happen. And so you need those kind of mentors who have been through it all, that are going to keep it 100% with you. And that's what he's been for me since day one. And build a board around people like him, because you need that in your business.
And he's still involved with you, Ofo?
Say it again.
Is he still involved with you?
He is.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people, it kind of like when we were asking, like, how do you start a business? It's like, how do you find a mentor?
Right.
And,
right.
It's hard, right? People ignore your emails. Busy people have a lot going on, but I think it's also, as someone now that gets asked to be mentor, it's also something that we love to do, right? Even the student work, or it's getting the cup of coffee with an aspiring entrepreneur. There's no reason why students should shy away from reaching out to folks that they look up to or admire in terms of their work or personality or whatever it might be. So people that we read about in the newspaper, especially in Buffalo, they want to see everyone succeed, and they want to see students stay in Western New York or come back here after college. So we would always encourage youngsters to kind of reach out to those folks that they want to meet.
I agree 100%. And I think the one thing I always highlight with that is like social media exists for a reason. And to me, like let those platforms do some of the work for you. So what I mean by that is, as a young ambitious person, like we tend to be we're the eye of our own story. Our story, our eye is not their eye. So someone like Eric, when I'm first reaching out and he's not responding, you don't take that personally. You realize, yeah, he's way busier than I am right now. Like, so what you do is find a cool way to, periodically check in, like, hey, I'm still over here. I'm still over here. And one of the simplest things you can do is add those folks on LinkedIn, create a LinkedIn profile, have a professional profile online, add those folks that you've reached out to or that you're intrigued or inspired by, and then actively do things that doesn't involve them, and then post those things. And what happens is over time, because there's folks that I meet 1 year and I don't talk to them really in depth for another 2 or 3 years, but by the time we're meeting that third year, like it's like they know my story and I've never really had a sit down with them. So you let social media or whatever tools you're using do some of that legwork, because as a mentor now in this stage of my life too, it's what I'm looking for are people who are doing the work. So if I meet with you once and we talk about, your initial goals and objectives, and I meet with you again 3 months later, and you're saying the same goals and objectives and there's been no growth, I probably won't meet with you the third time. Like I want to meet with somebody who's showing me like every time they're coming up with new things, even if I'm not responding to their emails, by the time they're following up, it's with an update because they solved the problem that they wanted me to help solve, a week ago, but they're always moving and they find a way to figure it out. So you have to be that person that's scrappy, that's hustling, that's out there. Just do it respectfully. And I think people will admire that and want to help.
I couldn't agree more. Julie, any last questions from your side?
I guess the last thing I'm wondering then that maybe could help out our students is like finding a balance and time for like your family and friends and your social life with being an entrepreneur. They'd have to mesh at some point, but how do you do what you enjoy doing outside of running your business?
The best way to balance everything is by setting boundaries, which isn't the easiest thing to do, especially as a young person. Like, and I say that because, you're not taking that seriously. Like, for example, right, if there's an issue with my bank, I remember this happening to me and I was in college at the time. I mean, I was in North Philly, so I got robbed. I called the Bank of America and I'm telling them all the things that just happened to me. Like, hey, I got robbed. They're spending money at all these different locations. And it's North Philly. So like people are hungry. They're spending money at like $30, $40 at McDonald's, $80 at the grocery store. And I was saying to Bank of America that this is not my charges. And they were saying to me, well, you've shopped at both those locations before. So, and I was like, so I called my mom and told my mom what was happening. And the second she picked up the phone, she's like, you told my son, and everything changed, right? All of a sudden they refunded all the money in my account. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry, sir. We're here to help, all those things. And I say that because bring me back to the question again, because there's a reason I brought up that example. The question was,
like the connection between your personal life and running your business.
Right. So I bring that up because like realize in the beginning, you're not going to be taken as seriously. So when you say to your parents, hey, look, these are my do not disturb hours, they're going to call you during them because it's like, who are you? Like I birthed you, right? So, but that's okay. Like your job is to, as you're growing, create boundaries around your workout time, create boundaries around your social time, your work time, your family time. All those things are in my calendar. Do I adhere to it 100%? No, but I have it there more for that inception piece, right? That reminder. If I look down on a Sunday night and it says family and friends time, oh, right, I probably should check in on my mom or dad, see how they're doing, right? Like I should call Graham and see how she's doing. Again, I could be better at this, I admit, but it's one of those things where those kind of boundaries are so important to set for yourself and your own sanity. And what people need is not for you to like, I know a lot of us get caught up in being people pleasers. That you will go tired doing that, and people will just walk past you as you get tired doing it. Your job is to be consistent with people, because we all have had that very hard professor or that hard parent or that hard coach where they always have a frown on their face, but then when they say like, I'm proud of you, you're like, oh, that really meant a lot because you're so consistently a hard ass that this really was warm. but you don't hate that person. You usually label them the hard ass and you keep moving, right? But they're consistent, and that's what matters the most. So no matter what your boundaries are and how you set them, continue to be consistent, and that's what's going to matter at the end of it all.
Amazing. Ofo, any kind of parting words or words of advice you'd want to provide as a concluding statement?
Words of advice. Do the work. Like that's I think my life's mantra is do the work. Right now, and for a lot of the US students growing up, you're growing up in a stage in an age where like technology is everything. And Instagram isn't real life. It's just not. And it's proven because now it's more of a shopping app, right? Like as of 2 weeks ago, it became more of a shopping app than it even is checking in on your friends or anything like that. Realize like it's training us all to be marketers. But the problem with that is that we're not focusing on the work and the consistency of the work. So everyone wants to be an entrepreneur because it sounds jazzy. It's a cool French word. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur because now you're like a star for doing it. That's not true though. Like if you're not fascinated with figuring out the monotonous work, that means the day-to-day work. This is the like you're up at 6:20 a.m. and the bus is picking you up to then go to class 7:20 to 2:30. Then you have sports or organizations, and then you have to do homework and study and all those things. Like that's actually what being an entrepreneur is. Like the more discipline you can gather from your school setting and school environment, realize that that's going to stick with you. What happens to most people is that wanes. So as they go to college and college schedule gets a little bit more sporadic, a little bit more spread out, you might be done on some days at 11 a.m. You have all day to chill. You might be done at 3 o'clock, but you don't have to study necessarily till the next day for that class. And people create lazier habits. And the reality is once you get into the work world, a lot of people, once Friday comes and 5 p.m. passes, they log off, they're done. And they don't revisit anything till Monday at 9. In entrepreneurship, that is not how you get things done. And you just can't get it done that way. And so if you don't train yourself to really be consistent with the work, the monotonous work, the Excel spreadsheets, the informational interviews, the note taking, the mundane things that aren't on Instagram, you're not going to be able to sustain. So I would say first, like realize the tool that you're using. So like social media is a tool. Realize it's that, separate yourself from that, and do all the work behind the scenes, and you should end up being okay.
Do the work. Well, let's go back to doing our work. So thank you, Ofo. We really, really appreciate this time from you. And I know this conversation will impact a lot of students locally for us. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Colleen, Julie, I appreciate you guys. And I'm always down to help. Really happy to see this happening.
Awesome. All right,
Thanks,
stay well,
Ofo.
and I'll talk to you soon for sure.